internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing Borderline, Narcissistic and Schizoid Adaptations by Elinor Greenberg. So this book is very interesting on a number of levels because the first and foremost, Elinor Greenberg is going to share her decades of experience in psychotherapy with the reader, and she's going to do so in a very simple way. Not simplistic, simple, meaning that she's going to make very complex ideas that come out of psychoanalysis accessible to people that have never read psychoanalytic theory, and which makes this book an incredibly good and thorough starting point. If you've never understood psychoanalysis or are very afraid of reading it, this is great because she's going to make everything accessible to you in layman terms, or as she calls it, plain English. She's not going to use fancy vocabulary, and even if she does, she's going to define it. There's even a glossary at the end of the book if you're unsure, so really brilliant. And on that side, it's really wonderful to read it, and at least in my eyes, it was a very enjoyable read. So fundamentally, her aim here is to train therapists that have only been taught the basics of psychotherapy to help them navigate the therapeutic relationship and the therapy itself with people with borderline, narcissistic and schizoid adaptations. So she calls them adaptations and not disorders. As for her, and she takes this idea very seriously, that at some point in their lives, these ways of being were completely adapted to a pathological environment, mainly the family, but it can be the society, the framework, the culture, so on and so forth. But what you have to understand is that it was, or in a way of surviving in an environment that could not itself adapt to the person, that the person was forced to mold himself into something different to fit in and not lose themselves to the environment, as the environment was often neglectful, hurtful, humiliating, violent, and so on and so forth. So there was not any place for emotional needs. And that is her premise. Her premise is that these types of issues stem from decades of adaptation to something that was pathological. Therefore, when they change environments, it can't become quote-unquote healthy like that. Like, it really needs a lot of psychotherapeutic work that she goes into very thorough detail in the book. Like, for example, she talks about how you might be able to create a toolbox with patients that, since that work with them help them. She gives the example of Tai Chi, how even though she's not a professional at Tai Chi has helped her, and it's a help that she transmits to the patient. In a way, she shows a very integrative aspect of psychotherapy. It's not because she's a Gestalt therapist that she closes the door to anything that can help. On the contrary, she opens the door to everything that might work, and she, even though she might not say it, she implies that you have to be creative when helping the patient. That it's not about like a protocol, it's about something that you create. She does give the example that in a way you shouldn't be a department store. That's what her supervisor told her. You shouldn't be a department store, but a boutique, meaning that you're highly personalized in the way that you deliver psychotherapy. That highly personalized way is very present in the book, and even in how she deals with the patients and the clinical vignettes that she gives throughout the book. So it's very enjoyable to read it as a clinician because it sparks your mind, like, oh yes, I understand what she's talking about, or oh yes, I see what she points out. So for her, she's going to focus on three main adaptations: Schizoid, Narcissistic, and Borderline, because those are the ones she has the most experience with. That this isn't to say that it's the only adaptations, but those are the main ones she's going to talk about in the book. So for her, she divides the book in three main parts. The first part is the borderline. For her, the borderline patient is a patient that, in a way, has been exploited throughout his life by the environment, that there was never any place that was given to their emotions, but on the contrary, they had to adapt to the emotions of others, take care of others, and fundamentally they were denied their own emotional needs by the environment. And also, something terrible is that when they tried to separate and individuate, meaning becoming something else, growing out of the environment, they were severely punished by that same environment, because in a way they became the people that had to carry emotionally the environment at a very young age, at an age where they should not have been doing it. So fundamentally they start off with a point of view in which they feel that if they are going to separate, well, the environment is going to retaliate. And it's something that makes their relationships very complicated, very unstable. And it's an instability that is also there within their emotional core. Because for the borderline patient, they're going to oscillate between the idealization and devaluation, both of others and themselves. And you can see that how in relationships it's going to make things incredibly complicated, because you can't, there's no middle ground in a way. It's all up or down, and the fluctuation can be incredibly quick and intense, mainly with people that are low functioning. So here, low functioning is not to do with IQ, social standing, or cultural premises. It's more like if the patient is capable of integrating certain boundaries created by the larger society and adapt to them in a certain way. And that's going to create fundamentally a frame in which they can reference themselves. She also says that it's very important for those people to be able to have a therapist that's not going to be retaliating against them. On the contrary, you have to try and help them have introspection, because that introspection is something that they don't have, because they were never given the place and the mental disponibility or availability to be able to build that capacity of introspection. There is also issues with splitting, because fundamentally, because they were not given that resource of introspection, they are more prone to acting out, and therefore mentally they tend to divide things into two boxes, good or bad. And what you have to understand is that when it's in two boxes, there's no merging of both. So it's all good or it's all bad. And if it slightly becomes grey, then it goes bad. And the whole point of therapy is to try and create that grey middle ground, because most sins are not excellent and not terrible. They're kind of grey-ish, and you can see both aspects of the spectrum within the same phenomena, meaning that someone has his flaws and someone has his qualities, and standing that, being able to withstand there is both flaws and qualities in others but in oneself, is called object consistency, or whole object, meaning that, and she explains this very well, that it's tolerating the good and the bad. Like, you can be angry with someone, but you still love them and care for them. Well, for the borderline, it's very complicated. If someone they are angry at, they might feel that they're all bad, they've just presented a facade, that they were lying all the time, and nothing of it was real, when in fact it was real, but it's just that they're disappointed, which is their emotion, they're entitled to it. But the problem with that emotion is that it comes and breaks down everything, both within themselves and with the relationship. So meaning that makes things far more complicated on an interpersonal relationship, I mean. So here we have also this idea, and she presents it very well, that the borderline is afraid of being engulfed in the feelings of others, but is also afraid of being abandoned if they're too distant, meaning that it's always a problem of right and just distance with oneself and with others. So it's very interesting that she talks about it, because for her, the core fundamental desire of the borderline patient is to be loved, and they're going to seek that love at any cost, even sometimes having sexual relationships with people they don't love or they don't feel attracted to, but they want the love of. So very interesting. For her, the borderline is going to do that regardless, because there is that idea that through the love of others they can fix themselves and fix their way of being, and they will find the perfect spouse, and then everything will be fine. Ever happily ever after kind of scenario, which rarely happens in real life, as the borderline patient often seeks people that he idealizes. And the problem is that once you're idealized, there's no way out but down, right? So it never lasts too long. So very interestingly enough, she created a concept of splash to mean how impactful people can be in the environment. So splash, it comes from the fact that she saw children playing in the pool and splashing everyone by bombing themselves in the pool. And that triggered her creativity, and she started imagining that for patients. So what she says is there's three main levels of it. There's high splash, there's middle splash, and there's low splash. So high splash is when, for example, someone is going to, let's say, being cheated on, as the example she gives. The cheating is going to provoke suicidal attempts, hatred, the will to destroy, breaking objects, and so on and so forth. The person will be incapable of functioning normally for a set amount of time. They will have to require sick leave or be hospitalized. They might show signs of violence, aggression, and fundamentally they're gonna splash everyone around them, meaning everyone from the colleague to the friend to the family, even the distant relatives. Everyone's gonna be aware of what is happening. So this is prototypical for the lower functioning patients that are going to not be able to cope emotionally and just lash out on an emotional level towards everyone else. Then we have the middle ground, where the person is going to scream, is going to be hurt, is going to break down, but they're not going to let that impede their work life, or they're not going to talk about it to everyone. It's going to be like they're going to talk about it with certain colleagues that they might be not too close to, but only like if the colleagues ask, and so on and so forth. And you have the low splash, which the person is not going to talk about it outside of the very close relatives, and they're not going to make a massive scene of it. They're just going to be disappointed, divorce, or go for marriage counseling, but they're not going to try and lash out on such a massive level. And she said that those three levels allow the clinician to determine where the patient is at, because as a clinician you have to meet the patient where they're at, rather than try and be here and pull them up. You have to go to the point where they're at and help them step by step. Perfect advice, very good. So fundamentally, she talks about this idea, and it's very valuable as a clinician in order to be able to build a compass of what should be done or how should it be done. As therapy is a perfect setting to be able to create a space for the borderline patient to be able to make out something of a stable sense of self and of others, as the clinician is not going to vary wildly. He's going to stay on a stable, on a form of stability, and also if there's mistakes, it can be talked about, discussed, and reframed as a tool for progress with the borderline patient. Something that she is very explicit and she gives very good examples of. And then she moves on to the idea of narcissists. So the narcissist for her is someone that's going to seek external validation, because they're not really capable of evaluating their own self-worth. A bit like a thermometer, right? It shows if it's hot or if it's cold. Well, the external world is going to work like that. And unfortunately, when it's cold, they might lash out, they might be rageful, they might be very destructive, because they feel that they've been slighted. And this feeling of being slighted is something that they're very afraid of. As she points out, at their very core, they feel vulnerable and they have low self-esteem, but it's not a low self-esteem that's going to manifest itself easily. They'd rather die than really talk about it in a way. And it's something that's still very there. So anything that goes against their feeling of being perfect is seen as an attack upon them. And an attack, not a critique, right? So they're going to just attack back in the same way. She divides three main types of narcissists. The Gucci narcissist, very fun. The closet narcissist and the toxic narcissist. For her, the Gucci narcissist is that narcissist that makes you feel special by association, oh well, I've selected you, therefore we're both very special, and because I'm super special, you're super special as well, right? And you're kind of part of the golden team if they ever select you. Then we have the closet narcissists. There are people that don't go into the spotlight, but work for other people that are in the spotlight, and they get the glory by association, right? And they can be very hardworking people, but she does say that often they like that because they have had a Gucci narcissistic parents that have taken all the spotlight, and they could only benefit from a bit of spotlight if they corresponded exactly to what the parent was. So in a way, they were able to get it, but only by proxy. And that's something that continued into their adulthood. And often they're very hard workers, and they tend to be very thorough in what they do. And the last one is the toxic narcissist, which is a narcissist that is engulfed within his sense of envy. An envy that's so massive, so intense, that they will devalue everyone else because they can't stand anyone having anything better than them. In a way, there are people that are above them, which they envy and they want to become like. And there are people beneath them that are the trash of the earth in their eyes. And there's such a wide disparity that in a way they envy the others and they value the others, right? So fundamentally, there's no equal for those people. And as a therapist, they're the hardest people to work with because they will constantly attack, even if there is progress, they will constantly attack the therapist as if there's an idea that you present to them that they did not have. You're seen as a threat. You show them that they're lacking. They might even feel that you're slighting them, that you're insulting them by giving your interesting theories that they didn't think about. How dare you, in a way, be more intelligent than me or understand something about me that I didn't understand for myself. So she does talk about how to deal with a narcissist and how you should be, in a way, in a more mirroring state of like understanding they hurt and they ache, even if what they do is unfair to others. You shouldn't confront them directly about it. You should understand their hurt, and then the second time try to explain why someone would see it in a different light. But only in the second time, and only if they're ready, because they might not be ready in the first year of therapy to do that. They might be ready afterwards. And she does say that you should expect them to end therapy if ever they feel too slighted, because as an external person, you're a threat to their vulnerable sense of self, because they feel that you might belittle them, humiliate them as they were humiliated being children. So that's always a risk for them, and it's a risk they're sometimes unwilling to take. So the last category that she talks about is the schizoid adaptations. So this is the category which is the less in terms of numbers of pages and in terms of concepts, it's much less than the two others, because I assume because of the mysteriousness of schizoid people and their general reluctance to psychotherapy, she perhaps has less experience, or she was not as willing to talk about it. So fundamentally, for her, the schizoids are people that dream to be in close contact with others, that dream to be with others, but feel there's a risk. They want, what they want overall is a sense of security, but they're unwilling to risk a relationship because they're afraid of being hurt. And they overinvest themselves as they feel that they can only rely on themselves for absolute independence, and that relying on someone else is a real true risk. She gives the example of, in a way, if a schizoid patient needs to make a phone call and needs to use a phone booth, which is an old-fashioned way of saying, well, when you had the phones outside, and if they need the phone and they need a quota, they're not going to ask for it. Contrary to the narcissist, which will feel entitled to it, or the borderline that will try and create sympathy to have it. And the schizoid, even if he desperately needs it, won't ask. And therefore they put a distance with others because they're afraid of being engulfed. If they're too close to others, they're afraid of losing their sense of self in others, meaning that they try and be as distant as possible and try and be as autonomous as possible. And she does say that, in a way, what helps them is long-term psychotherapy and understanding that they can count on the therapist, at least on an emotional level, which can help them open up and talk about what they truly feel deep down. So fundamentally, it's a very interesting way of seeing the three adaptations. And I really do like that idea of adaptations. I feel that it's so much more interesting than just a disorder, because it does imply that they have adapted to something pathological, and now we are readapting in another way, and that's brilliant and it's perfect. And so fundamentally, there's a lot of concepts I didn't talk about because if not, the video would be hours long, but it's a very good book, and I really, really, really recommend it, especially if you're a beginner or you're interested in understanding psychoanalysis in regards to personality disorders. This is really the, I would say, the first step in your journey, and a very good step at that. So I hope you like this video, and if there's anything else, please feel free to let them in the comments. I will see you in the next one.